Attacking the ear. Is it really about just bursting an eardrum? Is that enough to stop somebody? Well, today we're going to cover that particular part of the human anatomy, how to put trauma into it, and what the reliable aspects of this strike are. I've never had a time in my professional life where Americans have been more concerned about their own self-protection. Listen, if you're ready to put together your self-protection strategy for you and your family, listen, there's one place to go, timlarkin.com. Sign up for our free masterclass. Just give us your email. You'll immediately start getting information right away, modules for you to start putting together your self-protection strategy for this year. There's no better time to do it than now, and there's no better price than free. So make sure you take advantage of it at timlarkin.com. Also, please subscribe to the channel. It takes a lot to put these YouTube videos together. Obviously, we're not getting much support from YouTube. They're trying to squelch us, demonetize us, all that good stuff. But the more you share these videos, the more you get your friends to subscribe, it really helps. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the notification bell, and please, please comment on these videos. That lets YouTube know that people are interested. Much appreciated. Okay, getting into today's topic, the ear, attacking the ear. I have a very storied history with this. Most of you, if you followed any of my interviews, when people asked me how I got into self-protection training, one of the key moments in my life was when I had an inner ear injury doing a basic dive at the very end of my training and SEAL training, and it ended up sending me into vertigo, losing loss of balance underwater, bleeding from the ear. When I hit the top of the surface, I knew as soon as the corpsman looked at my ear, I was done. I was absolutely done. So I'm very familiar with the effects of an inner ear injury. But what's interesting is within the community and within a lot of training, people are very suspect about the ability to do it with your hands, the ability to do it and get that. And there are challenges to that, and we're going to talk about it. First of all, I'm just going to go to a clip of the guys from Self-Defense Tutorials. They're pretty entertaining. They've got some decent videos. I definitely would check them out if I were you guys. But they covered this, and they kind of covered it from the typical martial artist viewpoint on this. And so I'm going to make some commentary while they take a small snippet of what they were talking about with this attack. So let's go ahead and play this.
Hi, I'm Stephen Kesting. It's my friend and training partner, Alex Cast. And today, the dreaded Earclap. Somebody asked me about this the other day. They were wanted to know.
Now you can see they're already making fun of it. You can already tell just from that opening statement that they're questionable about it. Now listen, they've got some very good points in here, but this is typical when people when people look at it from this perspective.
So if this would actually work, and you do see this, you've heard about it, of course, the dreaded double ear clap.
40 years of martial arts training, how can one avoid it?
Yeah, how many times have you actually heard of it working anecdotally ever? Has it ever worked?
That's a good question. I have not, and I'd imagine if it did work, those that have had it done on them wouldn't hear it either.
If a ear gets clapped in the forest, does anyone hear it?
Yes. I thought I had bad dad jokes. These guys are awesome.
I can think of two people that I've heard of. I think Genki Sudo had his eardrum ruptured in Pancrase. I could be wrong about the details, but I think he did have an eardrum ruptured. A guy I know, I'm not sure I'm at liberty to share his name, had it ruptured in Pancrase as well. This back when they could do MMA with open hands and slap the head. I believe when Enson Inoue fought Igor Vachchanchyn, he also had an eardrum ruptured. Now, Vachchanchyn did a lot of this like slapping and then the big right hand. I don't know if it was a slap or a punch. I've also heard of it happening in boxing, like people sparring. Exactly. And the big, soft glove landing right on the ear. So eardrums can rupture, for sure.
Okay, so they gave some pretty good examples. They gave some good MMA examples, boxing examples of when it happened. You'll notice most of what they're talking about is a slap to the ear, and they're only focusing on the eardrum, which is interesting. I mean, I understand why, because that's what most people associate when they're going after the ear. But let's go a little bit further with some of their explanations here.
It can rupture. It's a medical condition. If you look up ruptured eardrum or perforated eardrum, it happens. It tears. Usually it heals. It's very painful. It's connected to your balance center, so it can be off-putting. But this idea that magically, Captain Kirk versus the Gorn. The Gorn has him in a bear hug. The Gorn has great big teeth. The Gorn takes about
Did you guys see why I picked this video? He's literally talking about Captain Kirk and the Gorn. I love that they are unapologetically geeks. Hilarious. I love it. Look how excited he is talking about this. I totally get it. It's very funny, and I don't mean that in any disrespect. I love it when people like start laughing at their own references.
15 seconds to decide to bite him, and in the time, Captain Kirk's pushing here, and he claps his ear holes, and the Gorn is part of it. It's all downhill from there. So, if we throw out the Star Trek reference, it can happen. Certainly, clubbing somebody in the area of the ear is a good thing. If I just take my generalized fist and I swing and I hit Alex here, that's pretty close to a couple of knockout areas that we've talked about in another video. It's pretty close to the jaw. It's pretty close to the knockout point halfway down the sternocleidomastoid. It's pretty close to the balance centers, and you're clubbing somebody in the head.
So those are all good areas that he's talking about. I've done obviously the video that I have, the knockout nobody knows about, which is where he's talking about on the side of the neck there. Hitting to the jaw, the TMJ, all of that's legit. And I understand why he's saying that, meaning we know these are easier to do and probably more reliable, which I tend to agree with. But let them make their closing statement here, and then I'll finish up here.
It's a good thing. As for rupturing the eardrum, good luck with that. I mean, you see some of the old books, the Applegate, Fairburn books, Kill or Be Killed, that sort of thing, 1940s era, where they're talking about making two cupped hands to percussively drive the air into the ear. Well, if you find somebody whose ear forms the exact other half of your hand, then that might work. But generally, playing around with it, a flat hand works just as well. You just want to form a seal on that ear.
Now, see, this is where I would disagree with them. This is where we'll part ways on stuff. He's talking about the idea of cupping the hand, what that does. I'll talk more about that at my closing comments. But the idea with the focus, and this is in most people within the martial arts and combat sport community, they're talking about just a quick seal of the ear. You heard him even say, "Oh, you just need a quick seal," because what they're thinking about is perforating the eardrum, which is really just the start of what you want when you're going for an ear injury. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to it's Dr. Brian Stutterer or Sutterer, Sutterer. I'll make sure I have the links in here. And Doctor, he's great. You should follow him. I just discovered him recently. What he does is he goes over a lot of sports injuries and really, really useful information. And I've really enjoyed a lot of his videos. This particular video talks about the inner ear. Now, he's talking about the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder fight. There was some speculation that when Tyson hit him in the side of the head, it looked almost like his boxing glove, as they were talking in the prior video, sealed on the ear of Deontay Wilder, and that he started to lose his balance from a burst eardrum, inner ear action. The doctor goes into this. Now, it was later, for the most part, I have not found anything that confirmed that happened. Deontay Wilder definitely was rocked by Tyson Fury on that, but it's not necessarily due to the result of an inner ear problem. In fact, the doctors where he was treated, where Deontay Wilder was treated, because he did have some bleeding in his ear, they said no, the ear was just lacerated. There was no inner ear damage, and there was no damage to the eardrum. So whether it was or not is irrelevant. What I like about this is the explanation this doctor gives. Okay.
So I think there's a few possibilities to explain the bleeding from Wilder's ear and why his balance was so drastically altered after this hit. Certainly a ruptured eardrum is one of the causes of bleeding from the ear, particularly in the case of what we call barotrauma to the eardrum, or any severe injury to the skull or around the base of the skull behind that whole portion of the ear can cause rupture of the eardrum. Barotrauma occurs when pressure builds up inside the ear that causes that rupture of the eardrum. This is what happens when someone gets slapped with an open hand across the ear. That pressure that gets pushed and forced into your ear causes that eardrum to rupture. This hit from Fury didn't look like it came directly on top of Wilder's ear, but there were some other times during the sequence where Fury's glove did seem to kind of come directly on top of Wilder's ear.
Okay, so he's about to go into the ear itself, and he's going to explain the anatomy of the ear and where you're going for. Most of what people are talking about is getting damage in the inner ear part, not the, I'm sorry, the middle ear, not the inner ear. And there's a huge difference between that. And, when it came to my injury, it was definitely an inner ear injury, which I'll share with you after this.
So,
Okay.
barotrauma causing an eardrum rupture is definitely a possibility. But what concerned me more watching this at first was the location of Fury's punch. A punch hard enough in this area would worry me about a possible skull base fracture and any sort of injury to the vestibular system within the inner ear. There's something called the battle sign that we can see when someone has a skull base fracture, where you get a lot of bruising around that area directly behind your ear where Wilder was hit. A skull base fracture can cause bleeding from the ear or a ruptured eardrum because of all that excessive trauma. And just based on how hard that hit was, where it was located, watching Wilder the rest of the fight, I'd still feel a little bit concerned that he could have a more serious injury, possibly a fracture. But a hit in this area could also just damage the vestibular system that sits within the inner ear, causing Wilder's balance to become severely impaired. We can divide the ear up into three sections: the external ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The external ear is that ear canal space up until we get to the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. The middle ear is the tympanic membrane to the oval window, and then your inner ear is your cochlea and your vestibular system. Within the inner ear, we have these structures called the semicircular canals. These semicircular canals are kind of arranged in all three different orthogonal planes, and they're part of what's responsible for helping us maintain our balance and our positioning in space. If you've ever had something called
Okay. So this is key. What he just talked about when he talked about the three areas, he talked about the external ear, the inner ear, and I'm sorry, the middle ear, and then the inner ear. And most people, what they talk about is just basically the rupturing of the eardrum, basically just inner ear damage, which is not the same as what he's talking about, the vestibular loss of balance that he's talking about right now. In order to get that, you have to get into the inner ear and you have to empty out the fluid in the semicircular canals. And it's devastating when that happens.
positional vertigo, these are the structures involved, where you can get little crystals that can build up and get stuck in some of these different areas of these semicircular canals and can cause you to have this severe vertigo. My fear watching this is a punch to this area along the back of the ear could cause a similar type of effect and potentially some short-term damage or injury to this whole vestibular system, which would then cause Wilder's balance to be severely impaired and explain why we saw him just essentially stumbling around the ring for the rest of the fight.
Okay, so as you heard the doctor say, he talked about the idea of losing that vestibular, the inner ear balance. That's what happened to me. Now, when it happened to me, I was underwater. As I've said in the past, you have waves on top of the water. You also have waves under the water. I went down. I was in a diving accident, a dive that day. I was congested. I already had tons of ear problems that the Navy didn't know about, but I had made it this far, literally 2 weeks away from graduating. Um, but an underwater wave came, hit my ear, and it just hit it perfect. I was already I felt pressure in my ear already. It was just enough to absolutely burst the eardrum. I felt a rush of cold water literally spike up into the middle of my brain, and then I felt warmness coming out. And that was warmness coming out were the fluids that the doctor was talking about in the semicircular canals, the the fluids within there. And that's when I lost all my sense of balance at that point. I had no idea which way was up. I ended up pulling myself up on a rope. I know some of you heard this before, but pulling myself up on the rope for the IBS, that was the inflatable boat that was above us. And I was pulling myself up. I felt that I was pulling myself at a 45-degree angle down. When my head hit the surface, it was flapping uncontrollably. I had no control of my balance. I had to completely stabilize me on there. And as I've always said, I knew as soon as the corpsman looked at my ears, I was done. I was not going to be able to pressurize dive anymore, and that was short circuited my career in the SEAL teams to where they switched me over to intelligence. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I actually agree with everything being said. The ear is a viable target, but there are caveats. One, anything covering the ears. You have somebody with longer hair where you can't really get a good seal on that. The other thing is you want to have your hands cupped when you do this. And the reason you want to have your hands cupped is because you're not trying to burst the eardrum. You're not trying to do a seal and burst the eardrum. You're trying to take a column of air. You're trying to compress a column of air with a very hard strike to the ear and send that column of air like a battering ram through the eardrum, not just bursting the eardrum. You want to go through the eardrum and burst it up into, essentially the inner ear. So that disrupts that whole area of the inner ear and your balance system, and that's what empties out the semicircular canals. That's the injury you want. You care less about the eardrum. It's just a little piece of membrane that's in the way to get you to your injury. Now, getting that is not always easy. Again, I talked about hair, anything else that's in the way. Somebody wearing, obviously a hoodie or anything like that. It's just if you can't get a clean shot at the ear, then it's not a viable target for you. If you do get it, though, it is amazing. We had one of our students. He was actually down in Mexico, and he saw in a back alley. He saw a girl being dragged into a car, and he went out to intervene with the two guys that were doing that. One guy, came at him, and the first thing he saw was the guy's ear, and he just literally slapped him in the ear, kind of like the way those guys were showing in the video, the two martial artists from self-defense tutorials. Just kind of like a slap. And the guy basically that got slapped, just went boom and looked right back. Our guy sat there and said, "Oh, no body weight." And this guy was still standing there, and he did a second shot. This time he stepped through, put his body weight into it, sealed the ear, got a big result. The guy went ass over tea kettle, dropped on the ground, and he definitely went into vertigo at that point. He was on there. Other guy ran off, and he was able to get the girl and get her out of there. But what was interesting was without a full strike, you're not going to get the result. So this is probably one of the few times I've identified a viable piece of anatomy that can get a big result, but reliability wise, you got to be careful. There's a lot of people that are out there that have longer hair or something in the way of the ear that will prevent you from it being a viable target. So as those guys were saying, yes, side of the neck, temple, TMJ, those are always available to you. The ear is something that requires that ability for you to send that, that battering ram of air right up into the inner ear. And if you can't accomplish that, you're not going to get the result. But I will tell you, as somebody who had it happen to them, it is devastating. I mean, to have your balance lost. And what's interesting is one ear, if you lose one side of your vestibular equilibrium, it's a greater than 50% loss of balance. It's really interesting. Same thing with your eyes. If you lose the vision in one eye, you lose a greater than 50% of your stereoscopic vision. So there's an interesting part of that. So how would I end this? It is a target. It does get a huge result, but you have these caveats. So it's just something to know in your quiver. But unlike these other people, I'm not hard and fast. It is a great target. If the conditions are right and you can get everything that you need in that target, it is devastating. And it is definitely not a joke target. It's definitely not one of those, goofball targets the way those guys were talking about it. But without body weight behind the strike and without a true compressed column of air screaming in through that inner ear, to the middle ear, and then busting up into the inner ear, you're not going to get the result that you want. So that's it for the ear. Now, remember, timlarkin.com. Give us your email. Start building your self-protection strategy. Share this with other people. Share these videos with other people. Get them to subscribe. Get them to comment. Get them to hit the notification bell. Help us grow this channel. Thanks for all your support. Until next time, stay safe.